So I know I don't have that much time. Thank you, Lorena, for being very patient with me and for inviting me and for spending time. We spent a couple of hours together trying to put this together. So I understand they only have like 15 minutes for now and then 5 minutes later. So I'm just gonna try to run through the whole idea of resilience. And, as she said, the history is definitely a huge part of really understanding how we are resilient because literally the government did everything that they could to kill us. So when we talk about resilience and we talk about sort of, history, basically, Indigenous people lived in Canada throughout. So we were 100% of the population. And I think now, if you look at the statistics of Canada and Indigenous people, we are very low, somewhere between like 2% or something like that. And, there are many ways that this happened in terms of wiping out the population. And, originally when the settlers came here, we got along really well. But I think that the point of view or values that the settlers had and the values of the Indigenous people were very, very different. And it seemed as if the settlers really made tremendous efforts to push their values onto us. And they did this in many different ways. They did it through, creating all these different policies, the Indian Act treaties, and creating residential schools. So in order to sort of help us to, and help is not exactly the word, but force us to sort of change, they did many different things. And one of the things was killing the way of life. So myself, I am Cree from Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan, and my people chase buffalo. That was the way that we sort of survived for like, the beginning of time. So one of the things that they did was kill all the buffalo. Once we no longer had access to our food source, it was much easier for the government to force us onto reservations. And you have to understand that the reservations they put us on were very poor in terms of it was hard to sort of live off that land. You couldn't grow things. Some of it was swampy. And that's where we were forced to stay. They actually put Indian agents on every single reservation and did not allow us to leave unless we had a pass. So that's the pass system from 1885 to 1960. And then in order to get food, the government would bring us food. So now we're dependent on the government. And then, one of the policies was the removal of children, which is the residential schools. But before we go to the residential schools, when I talked about killing the way of life, this is one of the ways that they did it. So when I talked about buffalo, you'll see a man at the bottom and a man on top, and they almost, the buffalo almost became extinct. So they did this with many different communities. They also did this with the Inuit. The Inuit really depended on their dogs in order to go hunting. And what they did was the dog slaughter. So between 1950 and 1970, they killed every single dog. So now people can't hunt. And they become dependent on the government to sort of, bring food up to the communities. And the government recently did an apology for the Inuit dog slaughter, or kimit, as it's called in Inuktitut. But there's still a lot of wounds because of that. So then the government did the residential schools. And the thing with the residential schools is they started like early in the late 1800s, and they closed the last one down in 1996. And today, all over the news, they're talking about BC because they found a residential school there that had 215 bodies. So basically a mass grave of Indigenous children. So I think that, Indigenous people are incredibly sad on a day like today. So once the residential schools closed down, then the government implemented something called the 60 Scoop, which was adoption. So basically taking children out of their homes and putting them into white homes, and that way their culture and their identity is erased. They did this through something called the AIM program, which is Adopt an Indian or Métis program. So basically they would go into different communities, different houses, take pictures of the kids, put them in newspapers. And of course, the parents have no idea that their kids are up for adoption. And then if the family was interested, then they just scoop the kid. This is a picture of me because I'm part of the 60 scoop. So this was actually the picture that my parents saw and they're like, hey, we'll take her. The thing about the 60 scoop is that almost all the adoptions failed. So what they did was they ended up calling this cultural genocide. So because I was part of the 60 scoop and because I had an incredibly difficult time, I was able to get my Indian status through the help of my my bubby, my grandmother. And when I got my Indian status, I was able to go back to university, get an education. I started working at the Native Women's Shelter in 1999, and then started to take all different kinds of act. Because when we talk about resilience, it's living through all this pain and trying to find a way. And if you have the strength and the direction to find that way, then it's almost like a responsibility to do so, because other people are still make change in whatever way that you can. And a lot of the change that I've been able to do is a long time, 19 to get things done. So one of the things is that very soon, June 21st is coming up, and June 21st is Aboriginal Day. So it's something that the government says, this is your day. Illegal holiday, but it's our day. And in order for us to actually celebrate that day, you need to do something. So I have many partners with the City of Montreal, and I throw a concert every Aboriginal Day, June 21st at Cabot Square, and it's free. And I find the money and I bring in all kinds of really talented Indigenous musicians. And the people that hang around the Cabot Square area are really thrilled by this experience because it's their people and it's free and it's music and it's a day of rejoicing. So we have all different kinds of artists that come. And we even have the soapstone sculpture, so you can actually make soapstone. And you know, we have one particular guy that comes all the way from Arizona. He's a world-class hoop dancer. And I just found out yesterday that we got the funding. So we're having Aboriginal Day, June 21st at Cabot Square, same time from 3 to 7. And we're partnering with Pop Montreal this year. So that's going to be super, super exciting. This is Munti Sinqua. So what we do, this is actually Aboriginal Day a couple of years ago, is when we bring the community out to celebrate our day. And he's doing a round dance. And we invite lots of organizations to also come out and present their work. So that people have an understanding about, you know, the organizations that work with Indigenous communities and have sort of a better understanding. We also do Aboriginal, sort of have people in the park of Cabot Square and have people come out and learn about the culture in a way through art. So whether it's dream catcher workshops or, you know, beading workshops or hoop dancing, everyone is invited. It's all free, and you have a better conversation with people when you're doing it through art, right? So this is also approved. So this Friday, I think June 25th or 6th, I'm not exactly sure, but at the end of June, we're going to be doing this again. So that's really exciting. And this is the soapstone workshop. So if you come down on June 21st, you can build, well, you can make a ninokshuk or something like that. The guys will show you how to do it. So are we breaking out now? Do I go into this, or I have 1 minute?
No, you can go into it. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so missing and murdered. All right, so we know what had happened with the inquiry. We know that, you know, for many, many years, Indigenous women were sort of targeted as being sort of victims to missing and murdered. Because of residential school, because of the 60 scoop, a lot of Indigenous people that are still traumatized would end up on the streets. And then when they would disappear, the police never filed anything. So, you know, we created the Ishkwe Project through the Native Women's Shelter so that we could literally address these issues and help families here in Montreal. If someone goes missing, instead of calling the police, because we still have a fractured relationship with them, they can call the Ishkwe Project and they will help find women in Montreal. So we've had this project for about 4 years now, and Jessica, who is the main coordinator, out of 46 women that went missing, she found 45. So this is being like part of the solution, and having people believe in organizations to come and help them, because until society decides that they are going to treat Indigenous people better, it's going to be really difficult to reach out, and we really need people to start reaching out. Another thing that happened here in Montreal was that when the Open Door left the Cabot Square area, there was an alarming amount of deaths, and that people who would go to the Open Door were left to their own devices. And when they tried to access services, they were turned away. And this happens all the time. You're turned away from hospitals or addiction centers or any other kind of institution, and you suffer. And we all know what happened with Joyce Echequan when she went to the hospital, how she was treated and what happened to her. But when I did this sort of call out to both the municipal government, to like the federal government, to the provincial government, to different partners about the lack of access and the fact that people were dying, nobody listened. The only person who listened was Christopher Curtis. So he wrote an article about it. He used to work for the Montreal Gazette. Now he works for Ricochet Media. And he wrote this article on May 23rd. And literally 2 days later, the city decided that they were going to help. And when they decided they were going to help, and when they said, you know, one organization in Montreal can run this, and they spoke to about 25 organizations. I was in the room and nobody wanted to do anything. So I said, I'll do something if no one else is going to. And because this decision was made in June, we had lots of time to kind of vision what would be the appropriate place to help people. And what we decided to come up with was Resilience Montreal. Right? So what we're saying is, through this organization, is that if you have been on the streets, and you've been on the streets for many, many years, because I know people when I started my job 20 years ago that are literally still on the streets, that makes you resilient. And we welcome you. And the whole idea about Resilience Montreal is really catering to the Indigenous clientele, but it is open to everyone, and making it kind of like a wellness center. We ended up working with the architects to build the place because we found the location across from Cabot Square, which was the miso restaurant. And I needed to have a fireplace in the in the building because everybody loves a fireplace, and people, if you go to a restaurant, everyone gravitates towards it. I'm like, we're going to have our own fireplace and people can sit around. We got 150 volunteers who built the place within like 3 weeks. It was really quite disgusting, but you can see the transformation as people are painting and taking off the carpet and starting to, you know, put down tiles. And, you know, eventually we had our grand opening, and, you know, we had the mayor there and you know, elder. And, you know, I remember Valerie Plante wanted to, you know, cut the ribbon and asked if I could cut it with her. I said, no, I'm not going to actually use the service. I prefer that you do it with because he has been in the area for so many years. He's the one who will come to our door every day, so you can cut the ribbon. So when we talk about like positive action, I remember when Joyce Eshkwan passed away, two of my staff from the Ishway project came in and they were just so upset. They were so outraged. And I think that because Joyce had shared her video, everyone was outraged. And people don't know what to do with all of this sort of anger and what is a positive way. So I said to the girls, I said, well, why don't we do a protest? So they came into my office on a Monday and we were going to do that protest that following Saturday. So it wasn't that much time to sort of put it together. Plus it was during COVID. Plus we were now in a red zone. And I was really worried about when anyone show up. If they show up, how are we going to ensure people are safe? Could I get enough speakers to come in? So I was really sort of plagued by the idea of doing this in a good way in her memory. But, I did a lot of interviews about it. We did a lot of sharing. And, the day of, I was really surprised about how many people showed up. So this is like the thousands of people that showed up. And the thing is that when we talk about, actions speak louder than words, the fact that we had thousands of people that all showed their outrage, all showed up. It was a peaceful demonstration, and we had really great speakers that came. And, we had lots and lots of people that, brought signs. We had traditional singers that came out that I hadn't seen in like over a year, that led the protest. And literally by the end of the protest, a CBC reporter came up to me and said, the government has just announced that they're going to be doing an inquest into Joyce Eshkwan's death. And I looked at the crowd and I'm like, this is because of you. Because if you were able to actually participate and show up in numbers, it shows the government that it is unacceptable. Even though we all know it is, when you show up like that. So when we're talking about actions, if you hear about demonstrations, show up. That really helps. It brings the message back. Another thing that happened in Montreal, which was really sad, was, Raphael Andre, who was Innu, came to Montreal for a better life and basically died in a porta potty during the curfew. I had talked to Michelle Odette, who is someone who used to run the missing and murdered inquiry, and she had offered me a chapatuan, which is what you're looking at, which is a traditional tent. And I had spoken to a government, Ian Lafreniere from SAA, and he's like, if you want a tent, we'll build a tent. The city didn't like this tent, but they liked this one. So this is what they did. They put a tent in Cabot Square, and the tent is very symbolic because after Raphael Andre died, in his community, they had a funeral for him, and then the whole community went to his house, the house where he lived, and built a tent. So this is what Raphael Andre would want. And we were able to bring in the Innu community, the Mohawk community, the people from Montreal, Montrealers that are non-Indigenous, to all sort of help and fundraise to build this tent. We were able to raise like $200,000. And then we did a ceremony. So it is called the Raphael Andre Memorial Tent. It has been up since February 3rd. We have an extension until June 30th. And now we're in the process of talking to the city about having a permanent shelter called the Raphael Andre Memorial Shelter. So there's still work to do, but we're still there. And we've had over like 6,000 people that have come in since February 3rd. Like, we take really detailed statistics about who is coming in and how we help them. And these are just some of the staff that are flying around, the Innu staff that came in from Quebec City. I mean, you have to love the idea that, the group of staff from Maison Mutinex traveled for 3 hours to help a population that basically no one wants to work with. Like, they were so pleased to work with the people, and we offer them food and we keep them warm. And we've had like 8 people, we've helped them to get into addiction centers and to also find people apartments. So we've gone over our mandate, right? This is how you can help, is really by volunteering at organizations. If you have money, send one to an organization. If you see someone who's homeless, either get a gift card for like a restaurant, Tim Hortons or something, or offer them something and just say hi. You know, if there's a lot of resources in Montreal, if you know of them, just be like, oh, do you know Chez Doris? It's down the street. Or do you know of Resilience? Or do you know of Native Friendship Center? Or, you know, just to sort of, you know, offer them some kind of information. And you know, there's also a lot of outreach workers that can also come and help out, right? Because we can't solve every social problem, but I think kindness is really the answer. So I'm done. That's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'll pass it over.
Yes, Nakuset, thank you very much for the talk, for making us, well, at the very least, me aware of stuff I wasn't aware of before. And I think that gets things going. I have a question about the, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name, the Mishkwa project with the
Mishwe.
missing women?
Yeah.
Mishwe, thank you. That sounds like it was very successful and that you were able to find all except one. What made it so successful?
It's the trust, right? The thing is that, you know, in we have a really bad relationship with the police, right? So like when the you know, the RCMP, one of the first jobs when they were formed was to push Indigenous people onto reservations, and then their next job was taking the children and forcing them to residential school and putting the parents in jail. So we are like, we don't get along with the police. So if someone goes missing, do you really want to call the police? So by having this project, there's an option. And we have a collaboration agreement with the police. So the police are supposed to refer people to us, and we're supposed to have our posters in all the police stations. Now, it's been a rocky road with them, but we just put out a 1-800 number. So if you go down St. Catherine Street, like even next to Cabot Square, you'll see the Ishkwe 1-800 number. So if you know of someone who's missing, or if you have like a tip of seeing someone or just worried about someone, you leave it, and then we deal with it. We answer your call, we have a conversation with you, we keep the recorded message, and we give them to the police and be like, hey, 10 people said that Jane is missing. You should probably do something about that, right? It's like offering to sort of be the solution. But because I don't think the police are just going to be like, hey, today's the day I want to mend the relationship with Indigenous people. We have to sort of help them through that sort of relationship by creating, you know, this 1-800 tip line will be sort of a key to having conversations with the police and getting them on board to finding missing and murdered Indigenous women. Yeah, it's Donna Paré that is still missing. You know, she went missing a couple of years ago. And I don't know if the police were very proactive. So I think that our staff are unbelievably diligent in making sure, hey, you're supposed to report to the family within 24 hours. Did you do that? Did you put up the posters? She was seen at this metro. Can we look at the footage? Like, they end up doing a lot of that work, but the work that they do pushes the police to do better. And it's unfortunate that we have to push the police to do better, but if we wait for them to have an epiphany, it's never going to happen. So we have to be proactive, and we have to keep it going. And, you know, we are able to get monies through Justice Canada for the first 4 years. And then last year we got another funder, the Pathy Foundation, and they are funding a new position. So now we have a researcher. Because of COVID, she can't go to all the communities in Quebec. There's 52 Indigenous communities in Quebec, but eventually she will, and she'll be able to create data. And that way we know exactly what the numbers are, because things are it's so painful to be Indigenous sometimes. Let's say you're living in a very remote community and you're like, okay, so I sent my daughter to Montreal to go to university. I haven't heard from her. I guess she's okay. Like, they don't, like, sometimes it's almost like the denial that if you try to make those efforts, that you're just going to be heartbroken. So you're just kind of hoping, and we want to go to those families and be like, so you haven't heard of so-and-so in a while? Let me help you with that, you know, and almost share best practices of what we're doing and see if it can be implemented in the communities. So that was a very long answer, but.
How did you turn your anger into a positive force for action?
I think the anger is always there. I think the anger drives you, but by my bubby giving me unconditional love, it sort of was like the seeds that I'm worthy. And she just kept giving me these seeds, telling me that she thought I was awesome, that I was a great kid, that I was going to do great things one day. And I was like, no, I'm a loser. I'm going to be in jail. I'm going to be a prostitute, because that's how my parents brought me up, you know. And that gets ingrained in you. So, I mean, that is like the best advice that you can ever give to someone. If you see someone who is having a hard time and who is struggling, become a mentor. Give them, you know, positive affirmations, because I think there's so much negativity that we absorb quickly, but we don't necessarily absorb the positive stuff. But if you sort of like almost brainwash them, one day they're going to be like, you know what? I think I can do this, right? So yeah, for sure. Credit definitely goes to my bubby for, you know, believing in me. And you know, hopefully, you know, she continues to watch over me and continues to give me that strength, because it's been, no, it's not been easy. I mean, I might make it look easy, but I'm telling you, there are days where, you know, it's just sort of, they're grueling. But you know, you have to take the positive with the negative. Like, I'm thrilled that we're going to have Aboriginal Day. Like, that was such a long process to actually get, you know, a day of celebration for us, but it is going to be so good, and people are going to be so happy, and you know, we'll welcome everyone to come. So be there. That's where.
Thank you. Thank you.